If you look at a digital map of North America today, the first thing that stands out is the scale of the borders. The United States shares a massive 5,525-mile land boundary with Canada, currently the longest international border in the world. But in 1492, this massive landmass barely registered on the global radar. When early European cartographers began dividing the world into spheres of influence, they largely ignored the northern half of the continent. The Spanish and Portuguese empires were searching for immediate wealth. Because North America lacked obvious surface gold, explorers sailed past it, focusing their military efforts on the resource-rich regions of South America and the Caribbean. That initial dismissal acted as a geographic buffer. For over a century, the continent's timber, soil, and indigenous populations remained mostly insulated from European conquest, leaving the territory open for whichever power eventually decided to sail north. The British were late to the scramble. It took until 1607 for them to establish a permanent presence by dropping a pin on the Jamestown settlement in Virginia. Despite Jamestown's fame, the oldest colonial city on the map actually belongs to the Spanish. They had established St. Augustine in Florida decades earlier, holding the site as a strategic capital for more than 250 years. As the British presence grew, they formed a tight cluster of 13 distinct colonies. This map shows that original foothold, hugging the Atlantic coast between the Appalachian Mountains and the ocean. At the time, these were vulnerable, disconnected outposts. They were surrounded by rival empires and powerful indigenous nations, with slim odds of surviving a single winter, let alone expanding to control the entire continent. The path to expansion started with a dispute over war debt. Great Britain spent heavily to win the French and Indian War, and expected the colonies to pay the bill through new taxes. Instead, the colonists rebelled in 1776, creating a new, independent nation. This map shows the territory of the Iroquois Confederacy. When the Americans wrote the U.S. Constitution to govern their new states, they looked to the regional governance system used by these 6 indigenous nations for structural inspiration. Once established, the borders began to move. In 1803, the U.S. paid France $15 million for the Louisiana Territory, doubling its physical footprint. To secure this investment, explorers Lewis and Clark acted as human GPS systems, navigating the wilderness and producing 140 maps. The western edge moved again after the 1846 Mexican-American War. By capturing Mexico City and annexing a third of Mexico's territory, the United States finally pushed its borders to the Pacific Ocean. In just 50 years, through land purchases, treaties, and warfare, the United States replaced its precarious coastal foothold with a transcontinental empire. Owning millions of square miles of land meant nothing if you couldn't actually reach it. To the pioneers of the mid-1800s, the American West was a roadless barrier of mountain ranges and deserts that could take 6 months to cross. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869 solved the problem of distance. By laying thousands of miles of steel track, the U.S. stitched its 2 coasts together and cut cross-country travel time to under a week. But the map nearly collapsed during the Civil War. The brutal institution of Southern slavery created a domestic divide so deep that 11 states attempted breaking away, threatening to tear the national borders apart. After the war ended and the continent was secured, the U.S. began claiming territory beyond its shores. It annexed island nations like Hawaii and took control of Guam and the Philippines to serve as strategic oceanic outposts. The government even carved into the earth to create a literal shortcut for global trade. The Panama Canal project required excavating an entire mountain range, permanently connecting the middle routes between the Atlantic and Pacific. This combination of high-speed internal transit and oceanic outposts marked a shift in the map. The United States had moved beyond being a localized republic to become a global imperial power. During the 20th century, geography became America's greatest asset. 2 oceans protected the U.S. homeland, while 2 world wars devastated the economies and infrastructure of every other major European power. The end of the Second World War saw the first use of nuclear weapons. For the first time, a single bomb could destroy a city, which meant that total war was now an existential threat to the entire planet. The Cold War that followed split the global map between the US and the Soviet Union. To contain the spread of communism, the Americans began dropping pins across every continent in the form of NATO military bases and defense alliances. That bipolar map lasted until 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed. The fall of its final rival left the United States with unmatched defense budgets and a scientific lead that dominated the global economy. The map we see on our screens today isn't a natural occurrence. It is the archive of 3 centuries of land grabs, financial gambles, and being the only power left standing when the other empires fell.